welcome to the first episode of whatever this is going to turn out to be. So you know a little bit about me. My name's Andrew. I'm 22 years old. As of filming this, I am one semester away from finishing my undergraduate degree at a tiny little college in Boulder, Colorado. The school is Naropa University, and if you Google it, the first two things you're going to see are that it was founded by a Tibetan monk and Jack Kerouac, who was a beat poet in the 1960s. 7 semesters in, I thought maybe it was time to start producing content instead of just consuming it. That's actually a super good segue. Just because of the kinds of things that I'm going to want to talk about on this channel, I think it's going to be really useful for you to know something about my tendencies, my mode of thinking, the way that I normally will attack an issue. That's for both of our sakes, because for me, it's a disclaimer. I know I've always got bias, and by telling you what it is to begin with, I feel more comfortable that I've represented myself. It's good for you as well, because you can take what I say with the proper number of grains of salt. But I think what's most important for you to know right now, at least, is a fundamental dualism that I embody and also don't believe in at all. This duality takes lots of different forms depending on where I am, what I'm thinking about, what I'm doing, but at its most basic level, it comes down to theory versus practice, abstraction versus concrete, mind versus matter. Within this duality, my bias is absolutely towards the first of each of these pairs. I spend most of my time in abstraction. I love thinking. I love theory. I constantly find myself deep in abstraction and theory, but totally leaving out any sort of practical result or concrete situation. I don't like to use examples. I like to use abstractions. I'm comfortable in thought because this is where I have the most practice. Nothing is more exciting to me than an idea. If something stays within my mind, there are no limits. I can think it to be anything I want. As long as I have the ability to dream it up, it exists in its fullest possible form within my mind. But as I said, I know this is a bias. Ideas are fun, but if they're not practical, they don't do a whole lot. The next step is to materialize that idea somehow. If it stays in my mind, it doesn't get to have an effect. I think regardless of what your field is, both are always necessary. Theory and practice have to work together. They have to be hand in hand. If you only have one, it's not going to create a result that is useful or interesting. Theory alone is tested by nothing and it creates no positivity. Practice alone is often aimless and repetitive and could be made far more useful with some theory. So in a way, this YouTube channel is my way of concretizing some of the ideas that have been totally abstract up until now. But I'm word person, not mind person, matter person, or both. At a certain point I realized that there was nothing more I could do thinking alone. I had to pick a medium. I had to pick a material that I was going to use to encode my thinking. Since I knew I needed some medium, to pick a medium and practice it, if I was going to invest in the concrete instead of the abstract and balance that aspect of myself, I was going to have to pick one because I did not want to spread myself too thin. If I was going to spend any time on practice, I was going to spend all of that time on the same practice. I was going to get so good at it that I could represent any thought. So the task of putting mind into form can take a lot of different shapes. It's such a broad task to describe that almost anything can be categorized that way. At some point in human history, there was someone who wanted 2 pieces of wood to be stuck together. And they had something in their mind. They had an idea, an abstraction, and that abstraction was a cylindrical wedge and a heavy flat surface. And that's a hammer and a nail. That was an idea. It could do nothing when it was in that person's head. But if that person invested in the concrete in addition to the abstract, then they would have the ability to produce a hammer and a nail, which, as opposed to the idea of those things, can actually join 2 pieces of wood together. Those abstractions, if they become concrete, wind up as tools or machines. But that's not what was exciting to me about encoding mind in Medium. When I envisioned the concrete versions of the abstractions that I played with so much, they were not things that could be used for utilitarian purposes. The abstractions that excited me felt like their material forms would be more subjectively useful, like art. My ends in this task were not utility. This led me away from the more practical practices and into the more artistic ones. Although I was interested by the powers of visual art and music, I felt I could not sacrifice the specificity of language. Even looking not at my personal ends, but at the more cosmic ends of encoding mind in Medium, I felt that if any practice had the potential to truly encode a mind, or at least as close as we can get, it was going to be language. It's incredibly frustrating to me that I have an idea in my head, and it's got to pass through matter before someone else can get to it. What's more exciting than being able to take what's in your mind, something only you have access to, and creating a physical object where you can show it to someone else? Language seemed like the best way to transmit perfectly what's in my head into yours. So I set upon taking these abstractions and with practice of language, doing my best to represent them. And that was really my goal, to represent my states of mind, my experiences, my thoughts, and my beliefs as precisely as I could, so that if someone else were to read that piece of writing, they would have as close to my experience as I could manage. Very soon I discovered how naive that was. So there's the mind, there's the patterned medium which is supposed to communicate it, and there's whatever perception the audience gets from reading that. In order for me to think that that process will happen with no loss of accuracy, the first thing I have to think is that I know what my mind is, that I know what I'm trying to encode. That's impossible. The more you think about something, the more nuance you find. That never ends. As fine as your measurement tool is as fine as the distinctions are in the thing you're looking at. This is one of the big paradoxes of representing yourself. First, you have to know what is the self you're representing. The more I try to figure that out, the less I'm sure I know what it is. Partially it's because we're complicated people. We're so interconnected, and there's no way we could account for all the variables, the inputs, and the outputs that make us who we are. On top of that, you can't inspect your instrument of measurement with that instrument. Do me a favor. Try to bite your own teeth. What does your own tongue taste like? Since understanding your own mind in order to represent it is essentially asking your own mind to look at itself, you can't expect there to be a clear perception. The third paradox I ran up against was what I call incommensurability. One day, for fun, I decided to see if I could get myself to a place where I believed the exact opposite of something that I believed to be true. For the record, I'm not talking about a factual truth such as the weight of the sun or the number of legs on a dog. I'm talking about an abstract truth, a belief that is informed by experience but not empirically provable. I looked at these beliefs, I looked at their opposites, and I found that I could pretty easily get myself to a place where I believed the opposite of that thing equally as much as I believed the original. Depending on the stories I was telling myself or the data that I was choosing to cherry pick from my experience, I was able to conclude exact opposites whenever I wanted. And that was kind of frustrating. What do you do when X is true to the exception of Y, and then you blink, and then Y is true to the exception of X? What do you write? And even if you could use all the nuance in the world to understand yourself, even if your lens could turn back on itself with perfect clarity, and even if you found a way to sort out all those incommensurables, wait 5 seconds and your mind is completely different. So it would seem that I was at another dead end, but it didn't feel that way. For some reason, the fact that my goal in setting out on this journey of encoding mind into pattern medium seemed impossible actually made me all the more excited to get going. I knew there was no way to do it perfectly, but I had also heard beautiful songs, read incredible books and poems, and felt that I was really experiencing someone else's mind. I know that's possible. So I figured I'll get as close as I can. Maybe I'll learn something about myself along the way. And at the end of the day, it's not like we experience all of these multiplicitous states of mind at once. When I write a poem, it's a snapshot. It's what my mind was doing at that moment. I'm not claiming that it's the entirety of my mind. In fact, I don't experience the entirety of my mind, ever. So it's more true to my experience if I present to you a section or a single moment in time. Now, the main reason that this is my pursuit is because I like it. It's fun for me. I like playing with language and seeing what I can create with this totally artificial structure. The fact we can communicate anything with language is incredible to me. So a lot of it is just the fun of playing with the structure. And I think at the end of the day, I couldn't do anything else. I have curiosities, and I have unsettled, unresolved questions in me. And when I pull those threads, this is where I arrive. I think it's important culturally too. There's a guy who I will definitely mention more on this channel named Terence McKenna, and he says, "Reality only goes as far as the roads of language take it." So part of my motivation in being a writer is to help expand the universal mind, to bring more possibilities of reality into existence. Even if they don't come to fruition, at least they are now in the field of possibilities. When I pull these threads, it leads me to language, but it leads me a lot of other places too. It leads me to spirituality and theology. It leads me to technology, psychology, and about 100 other ologies and non-ologies. Well, if any of that meant any to you, or piqued your interest, I hope you'll come back, because I've got a lot to say. I'm WordPerson. Thanks for watching.